activism begins with ACT. The Russ Belville Show features the stories of hardworking grassroots activists working for an end to prohibition in today's activist agenda.
All right, welcome back, everybody, and it is 36 after the hour, and joining us by telephone from Virginia in his home, we have Keith Stroup, the founder of NORML and the author of It's Normal to Smoke Pot, the 40-year fight for marijuana smokers' rights. It's Keith Stroup. Keith, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Russ. Thanks for having me on.
So glad to have you here. So much to talk about. First of all, the book, It's Normal to Smoke Pot. How's it doing? A lot of people enjoying this?
Well, I am not an author, and I'm sure that people who read the book recognize that. And I spent years working on this because I headed in several different directions. But what I ended up with, and I actually appreciate some good editors at High Times for helping me do this, was I threw out about two-thirds of what I had written because it was information that while I might have thought it was fascinating, very few other people would have. And it really ends up being a history of NORML. And in fact, I felt pretty good about that. I should have probably simply aimed at that at the beginning. What I wanted to do with the book is to make sure people remember in future generations that NORML has always been a consumer lobby, and we're serious about that. I didn't just come up with some term. I literally worked around Ralph Nader for 2 years when I was avoiding the draft in Vietnam back in 1968 to 70, and I learned a lot about using your law degree to affect public policy instead of just trying to get rich. But the policy I wanted to impact was legalizing marijuana because I had first started smoking grass when I was a freshman at Georgetown in 1965, Georgetown Law School. I know it makes them proud to hear that. At any event, because of that, as we get close to legalization, and now in Colorado and Washington, we're actually dealing with the specifics of regulation, what level tax, what kind of retail outlets, who qualifies, who gets a head start. Consumers have an enormous role to play. The industry will be very well represented. You know, there already is at least one national industry lobby. There are several state-level industry lobbies. There's hundreds of millions of dollars that is pouring into these states that are legalizing marijuana because it's kind of like a gold rush. It's sometimes referred to as a green rush. Well, all of those people are good people, but they'll be well represented because they have lots of money. What we have to make sure at NORML is that consumers are at the table and are also well represented. And by that I simply mean that what consumers want, they want a product that is high quality, affordable, and convenient. Now, they also want it to be safe. They want to make sure they know what THC level and what CBD level and make sure it doesn't have any molds in it. But essentially, what we want as a consumer lobby is affordable, high-quality marijuana that's convenient to get. And so that's going to be NORML's goal over these coming years. And since I'm becoming an old man and don't know how long I'll be around, I sort of wanted to record that to make sure we don't lose our way.
Excellent. And as a consumer lobby, there's issues that are coming up as we go along the routes of legalizing for medical use and legalizing for recreational use, some trends that have seemed to develop. And I wanted to get your take on these. Yesterday, I even ranted about this a bit as Colorado, in its 7th attempt, finally got a 5 nanogram limit passed, although it's a permissible inference. And so now we've got both of the legalized states setting a limit, a numerical limit for THC in the blood for motor vehicles. Do you see this as a trend that's going to continue as other states try to legalize? Is it going to get worse? Or if we can find
I think
how?
It's going to be a race between the science versus the ideologues. The ideologues, obviously, are trying to use it to discourage marijuana smoking and to classify people as if they're impaired drivers, when in fact they may not be impaired at all. They simply may be people who are experienced smokers. But even though they have THC in their system, if they're not impaired, what we really need is a test that adequately measures impairment. None of us want impaired drivers on the road. And I actually am very proud. I think Paul Armentano has played a major role. I know he's feeling discouraged right now, but he's worked for the last 2 or 3 years in Colorado to avoid a per se statute. As you know, there was a real strong attempt initially to pass a 5 nanogram or even lower per se. I think some people proposed 2 nanograms. And as you know, there are about a dozen states that have zero tolerance. You have any THC in your system, and you are per se deemed to be impaired. So my feeling is that with each issue like the DUI issue, whether in Washington or Colorado, there is a bit of a trade-off. We can't win these issues unless we enjoy the support of a majority of the public. And a majority of the public do not smoke marijuana. Only 13% smoke marijuana. So in order to win and to maintain the political support that we're currently enjoying across the country, we have to make sure that we respond in a real fashion to concerns when they're raised by people who don't want to treat marijuana smokers like criminals, but they also want to make sure they're not going to have a lot of impaired drivers on the road. You know, they have a right to expect that their own culture isn't going to be degraded by the fact that they've agreed with us and stopped arresting smokers. So I hope over the next couple of years that the government will finally fund some studies so that we can develop a roadside impairment test that really works and measures impairment and not just THC. But for the moment, at least if we're going to have those kinds of things, let's try to make them rebuttable presumptions or inferences rather than per se laws. That gives the defense counsel at least some chance to overcome that presumption.
Is it a case? I was just wondering, is it a case that the limits are too low, or that there shouldn't be a limit?
Well, no, I think if you had a real impairment test, you wouldn't need a limit, frankly. Now, the limit may serve some function at some level just to reassure the real, the ideologues that, no, if you fall down drunk, stoned, you can't walk to the car, then of course you shouldn't be driving the damn car. We all recognize that. But any reasonable impairment test is going to determine that better than a statutory guess, and that's all these 5 nanogram statutes are. Again, I'm not terribly discouraged by the fact that they adopted the 5 nanogram presumption, only because there are states around them that have zero tolerance laws and have 2 nanograms, and so there's and have per se laws instead of inferences. So we held them off, like you said, 11 times or something before they finally managed to get that passed. And I know how disappointing that is to those of you who fought hard to avoid it. But I don't think we want to lose sight of the forest because of the trees. Mm-hmm. The real issue here is that it is incredibly important that Colorado and Washington are actually legalizing marijuana, and they're dealing with the details of how it's going to work. And so our job, I think, those of us who smoke marijuana, is to embrace this sort of regulation, because even though I know a lot of people would rather not pay a tax, but that's the deal when you bring your culture above ground. But with it, we're also going to get a lot of consumer protections that we wouldn't have otherwise.
So moving forward, we look at 2014 and 2016 as the next 2 big elections, and there's a number of states. I know Oregon and California are in the mix, Alaska, and maybe a few of the New England states. I think Maine and Vermont have talked about it. So as they move forward, do you think they're going to have to include some sort of limit? And if so, should it just be a higher limit? Or can we win a legalization without a limit?
I don't think for a few years we will probably have the level of support. Eventually, I think we could, because eventually what experience is going to show in these states is that you don't suddenly have a lot of impaired drivers on the road. They may not realize it, but the 30 million of us who smoked marijuana in the last year in this country, we also drive. And we've been driving all year. So it's not like we never drove. You never had marijuana smokers driving. Of course, you've had millions of marijuana smokers driving for, the last 75 years of prohibition. So it's more a perceived problem than a real problem. And I think once a couple of the early states demonstrate that there's no big spike in DUIDs and there's not a lot of people being maimed on the road or killed on the road because of stoned drivers, then I think this concern will become far less important politically. But right now, it seems to be the one thing that the voters told us in California with Prop 19. The voters have voted against it more than any other reason. They cited their fear of impaired drivers on the road. So it is a real concern that non-smokers have, and so we've got to deal with it.
Yeah, and just to buttress that point of yours, I've been paying attention to Washington State, and DUI stats aren't available yet. FBI Uniform Crime Report's usually a year behind when they do all that reporting, but I was able to find Washington State monthly fatalities on the road, and since the passage of I-502, it's been a declining trend month by month, and each month is lower than any of the registered months from the past 5 years.
And by the way, that's probably going to be the substitution effect that, of course, a lot of social scientists have discussed in theory. I suspect that's probably what's at play here. And if it is, of course, then I think it'll be easier to overcome this concern that our opponents now have. But again, the problem is, of course we could have an impairment test that measured when you're impaired if you've been smoking marijuana. The reason we don't have it is our own goddamn government wouldn't put up the funding to do it. They didn't want to have an impairment test. They want to treat all marijuana smoking as if it's abuse. There's no such thing as marijuana use. Well, of course there is, and most people who smoke are just users, they're not abusers. But we need the test. I know it sounds strange to hear from a marijuana advocate, but we do. We need it for our own protection.
I've got folks in the chat room that are following along as well, and the first question we've gotten from them is, how can they get your book?
Well, there's a couple of easy ways. If you want an e-version, you can go to iTunes or Barnes & Noble. You can get it from the normal website, and you can get it from the High Times website. Unfortunately, that's it. It's not marketed in a major way. Obviously, if you're asking my recommendation, I'd say go to the normal website and buy it. But frankly, I don't care. If you're interested, buy it any place you want. And I will say the e-book version is only $4.20. The book's only $15 anyway, but the e-book is $4.20. So
fantastic.
That may be the preferred avenue to go to.
Excellent, excellent. And another trend that I wanted to get to, we talked about the driving limit trend with legalization. In medical marijuana, there seems to be a trend now that since 2010 that states pass medical marijuana without allowing the consumer the right to home grow. Starting with New Jersey, as you recall, and followed shortly thereafter by the District of Columbia, and now more recently, which New England state just we've got Delaware, just passed theirs. Illinois and New York's bills also don't have home grow in them, and New Hampshire is looking to the governor was complaining she'd not sign it if they didn't take out the home grow.
Yeah, I think what's happened is law enforcement has gotten more refined in their opposition. For a long time, all they had to do was yell law and order and marijuana leads to heroin or something. All these elected officials that kowtowed to the police unions and to the police generally would do what they wanted to do. In this instance, those old arguments quit working, but the one that they really have focused on, excuse me, I'm choking here, is what you've identified. So, in some ways, it's a victory to us that that's all law enforcement is left to argue. But even that, it won't be long until it'll be over. We are winning this issue, Russ, which is really important for people to stand back and realize, not because we got more clever, however that should be said, not because our arguments became a little more refined. No, we are winning it because we actually finally did win the hearts and minds of the majority of the American public, and that's a significant accomplishment for our movement, and it's why we're now dealing with these nuances of what's legalization going to be like and what's medical use going to be like. The cops began to focus on what they considered their inability to control the black market if people were allowed to grow their own marijuana. And I suppose there's some truth to that. There's no doubt probably the reason a lot of us would like the right to grow it is because it's harder for them to control. So by focusing only on the cultivation, they have succeeded with a lot of mainstream politicians who want to support what we're doing, but who also don't want to alienate the police. And so that seems to be the compromise they've come up with.
We're speaking with Keith Stroup, the founder of NORML and the author of It's Normal to Smoke Pot, the 40-year fight for marijuana smokers' rights. And speaking of NORML and what's going on, the NORML Legal Committee's got the Aspen Legal Seminar going on at the end of this month. We'll be there with 420 Radio covering it for you. And Keith, we're really looking forward to going up there. It's such a great time. Tell folks about the seminar, because it's not just for lawyers.
No, this is we have 2 seminars a year, 2 legal seminars. The one is in Key West, and we have a space limitation, so we only limit that to lawyers only. But the one in Aspen, we actually invite people who are simply consumers, or they're interested otherwise culturally, they're in the industry. They're welcome to attend. Frankly, their registration fee is less because they're not looking for what's called continuing legal education, or CLE credit. But it's a marvelous time. It's a wonderful time to be in Aspen because it's off season and it's beautiful. It's not crowded. You can get a reservation wherever you want to go. If you've ever been to Aspen during the season, it's hideous. You know, it's like being in Manhattan or something. It's so crowded and you can't get in to have dinner. So this is a wonderful time of the year to be in the Rocky Mountains. But in addition, we have a couple of traditions. We're doing them both this year. One night we go to a beautiful home that Jerry and Chris Goldstein, old friends of ours, a criminal defense lawyer that works out of San Antonio, Texas, but has another home in Aspen. They always hold a fundraiser, a dinner one night that's hosted, and the chef is Chris Lanter, who owns a restaurant in Aspen, a fancy restaurant called Cash Cash. And he prepares the food, and it's a fundraiser for NORML. And then on Saturday, we go out to Hunter Thompson's old home called Al Farm. His widow is kind enough to invite us back out most all years, and they have some live music. Actually, some of the old Nitty Gritty Dirt Band are still around, a couple of other locals, and they play some music, and we have some cookout. It's a wonderful experience to be in the mountain with 100 or so of your stoned-out friends from NORML.
Oh, yes, and I will actually be bringing my bass this year, so we'll have a really good jam.
No, absolutely. As you remember, they always invite anybody from the crowd to come up at some point. Bill Panzer always does it. I think there are a number of other people who bring their instruments. I think, doesn't Matt Kuhlman, I think?
Mm-hmm. It's Aspen and Owl Farm are some of my favorite memories. I even have sitting right, I have a shotgun shell from Hunter's farm that I kiped because I figured Hunter would understand.
That's nice. I have this wonderful picture on my wall where Hunter was at the shooting range behind his house, and he was shooting a picture of Ronald Reagan, and he used to do that by shooting a can of paint, and it would explode, red or blue paint all over some picture, and he'd take it into Aspen and sell it to some silly fan of his for $5,000, At any event, this time the can exploded and blew him back and knocked him on his ass, and he sent it to all of his friends, and it says, the death of Dr. Thompson, Owl Farm, Thanksgiving. Let me see what year it was. I can't even read it. And he says, the wicked accused, the godly defend.
That's right. And didn't you get your ass almost shot by Hunter Thompson at one point?
Yeah. I mean, I actually tell that story in the book. I've never believed that he probably was going to shoot me. I think he was acting out, but you're never sure with Hunter. That was part of the appeal, was that it was always a little bit dangerous when you were around him, either getting in trouble, all of you, with the authorities, or him getting a little out of control. But that certainly did make it it was like an adult's playground when you went out to visit Hunter. I considered myself unplugged from the world. Of course, you had to if you were going to visit with Hunter.
No kidding.
We miss him, I assure you. His friendship was very real, and all of us who knew him well miss indeed the man. It's wonderful when we go back out there at people who don't know. His widow has kept the house almost like a museum. When you walk into it, it is exactly the way it was when Hunter was alive. And it's almost eerie at times, but it's wonderful to see.
So as people who might want to attend the Aspen Legal Seminar, you can get there by going to normal.org/Aspen. And it's a great time to go because, like Keith said, it's before their season, so the prices aren't completely jacked up to the stratosphere. They're still high.
Oh, yeah, no, the rooms aren't too bad. Frankly, I can't remember what they're charging.
I think it's $165 for the singles.
It has nice single bedrooms, but he also has real nice 2 bedrooms where each of you have your own private bath, etc. So it's a nice place to do group, But I certainly would encourage anybody to come. It's a good experience. It's not just a matter of getting together with friends and getting high. We all do that whenever we want to. It really is a sense of exhilaration when you're at a location where it's clear it's no longer a crime to do what you're doing. And Colorado falls into that now. So I'm looking very forward to getting back out. As you were, Russ, I was just in Denver.
Yes.
The Cannabis Cup.
And we'll both be going after Aspen to the Texas Regional Normal Conference.
That's right. Yeah, it sounds like they're going to do a good job. I think they've got most of the various Texas groups involved. It sounds like a great time.
What are some of the topics being covered by the attorneys there for the seminar, in case people are...
Well, I'll tell you, the one I think is most timely is it's on the first day, and Lance Rogers out of San Diego is handling it. I suspect this is a topic we're going to include on our legal seminars for a number of years because there's no set answer to it. But the title is Ethical and Legal Liability of Attorneys Representing Cannabis Businesses. In other words, keep in mind that ethically, a lawyer traditionally has never been allowed to advise a client on how to successfully evade the law. Well, that's what you're doing if you're advising a cannabis business, because it still remains illegal under federal law. So
Sure.
it puts the legal profession in a very strange place. And so that's one topic I'm looking very forward to. On kind of more modern stuff, there's a couple of cell phones that I think are terrific. E.X. Martin out of Dallas is doing one he calls Cell Phone Forensics for criminal defense lawyers and iPad for the defense. And Aaron Romano out of Connecticut does a similar one, but they've assured me they've done these at other seminars together and they don't overlap, called Debunking Cellular Telephone Tracking, How to Win Your Case and Make the Prosecutor Cry. So, in other words, a part of what we're doing is we recognize that we got an obligation to keep people current with the latest tools and methods and techniques. And one of the challenges for a criminal defense lawyer always is how do you do a good job for your client, but remain ethical in the sense that you're not subject to being disciplined by the bar. That's always been a risk that defense lawyers take if they get too close to their clients.
Absolutely. And folks, there's plenty that you can learn there. I've done a few of these seminars, and I remember one year on drug dogs that just totally opened my eyes on a whole bunch of topics I'd never thought about before. It's totally worth the trip. Check out normal.org/Aspen if you're interested in going. And Keith Stroup is the founder of Normal and the current legal counsel. And we thank you so much for joining us here again on the Russ Belville Show.
Always my pleasure, Russ.
All right,
I look forward to seeing you at the end of the month.
All right, see you then. Well, that's all the time we got here for Hour 1, folks. Thanks for joining us. We'll take things into Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio. I've got a little rant on the whole no home grow situation to talk about. Cousin Kenny's in the house. Brian the Red's made it in as well, so we'll chill out and just relax a little and take your calls at 971-533-7111. I kind of lost track of what I was saying. How could that have happened? Hey, for Cousin Kenny and Brian the Red, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it,